Hello friends of JM Pro TV. So we are now again in UNC Asheville, and now we have the pleasure to talk with the main speaker. How are you, Michael?
How you doing?
Okay, thank you very much for answering our questions. So our community TV basically is serving communities of color, Latinx community and African American community. And my question goes in that way. So how you can see the relationship in the food in Latinx community with the African American community?
Well, I think a lot of the foodways of Latin America were shaped by the exchange of Europe, Africa, and Native America. I mean, there are no plantains, no tostones without Africa, because plantains and bananas were brought on slave ships. Rice was brought on slave ships. A lot of tropical fruits that came through Southeast Asia to Africa came to Latin America that way. It wasn't a roundabout, it was a crossover. And so often, like with mofongo and with other foods and yuca, all these foods reflect kind of like a clash of cultures. But in the kitchen, it kind of worked together because Native and African foodways, from Mexico down to Brazil and down to Argentina, had a lot of things in common. So a lot of starches, a lot of spices, the peppers that came from the Americas became very popular in Africa, then come back to the Americas as a spicy, rich cuisine. And it's just so powerful how, like, our ancestors figured it out. And they made the food sing. And it was like, it wasn't fancy food, it was the food of the earth. And it was organic. It was all these labels that people put on food we already had. So it's even more pronounced when you go to Brazil, when you go to Cuba, when you go to Puerto Rico, when you go to Haiti, it's more pronounced. Dominican Republic. When you go to certain parts of Mexico where that African presence was, how all these cultures were coming together and how it all meshed as one.
And can we find like a common denominator in most of the, like all the Americas, right, North, Central, and South, because all of them like have slavery
Corn
time?
Is the biggest one. Corn tells an incredible story because corn is indigenous, but corn crosses the ocean. It goes to Europe, it goes to Africa, does its own thing, and then crosses back over. And then how the corn is prepared. How, you know, in Brazil, they make something called couscous. In America, in Louisiana, they call it couscous. In North Carolina, they call it kush. It's basically what happens when you take cornbread and corn grits and cornmeal and make like a savory dish out of it, or even a sweet dish out of it. So it's like, but the word is African and Arabic, right? So it's like all these different peoples and parts of civilizations are mixing together for 500 years. And they're asking anybody's permission. They're just doing it because they're developing in a way that fits the fact that these people are in exile. These other people are oppressed and moved off their land. So what are they going to do? They're going to form maroon communities in the forest. They're going to resist slavery. They're going to create barbecue and jerk. And they're going to create cuisines that enslave the people's palates who enslave them. So that nobody doesn't eat the peasant food of the people. We all eat the food of our ancestors. In the South, that's true. In Brazil, that's true. In other parts of the Americas, that's true. You know, there's no anticuchos without Africans, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a part of the story.
And it's very interesting because corn that you're talking about, corn is sacred. So I'm from the Andes, from Peru. Yeah. So corn is sacred there and still there. And we're pretty way back to the colonialism from Spain.
Right.
So, but this is my final question, Michael. How important? I know that everybody like to keep like their original food, Peruvian food, Latin American food, Mexican food, but how we can go beyond that, beyond just keeping cooking what our grandmothers cook, but how we can add story in our own families, in all the neighborhoods, to keep our resilience.
I always tell people that your food will never be the same food. You may imagine that you're doing the same thing that abuela was doing, but the reality is, just like every generation is a recombination of genes, every generation is a recombination of narratives and stories and resources and access. So our food is not a carbon copy of the past. Rather, our food accrues different layers and narratives as the generations move forward. And that's the most important thing to remember, is that part of it is, you know, when one day somebody decides to switch out an ingredient, one day somebody decides to try something new, all of that adds to the richness of the cuisine. The tradition is maintained, but it's dynamic and not static. And that's what's important to remember. The food tradition itself has life. As long as that life is in it, it's going to keep going.
Thank you very much, Michael.